Welcome back, everyone. We are reading Witches by Roald Dahl. Now, we have gotten a little bit into this story, and I want to see how much you remember. So, while I am doing my review, I want you to think about what is it that witches hate most? All right, so let me review what we have read so far. Our main character is a little boy whose parents tragically passed away in a car accident. He is now living with his grandmother, who was originally from Norway. Now, his grandmother has many tales of witches. She knows all about them and is warning this little boy all about the dangers of witches. So, do you remember? What is it that witches hate the most? They hate children. They want children to disappear, and they try to make one child disappear every week of the year. Ooh, that's a lot of kids. So, what are some things that his grandmama tells him to look out for with witches? They have a few distinguishing features, right? They always wear gloves because their real hands have terrifying claws on them. And so to cover them up, they'll wear gloves all year round. They also are bald. So they're always wearing a wig, and it makes their heads itchy. So if you see someone always itching their head, maybe it's a witch. Another thing is their nose. Their nostrils are extra, extra big to sniff out children, as you will. Also, they have very interesting eyes. Right in the center, they don't have a black pupil like everybody else. It looks like fire and ice, and it gives you a chill every time you see it. Lastly, something that's not as easy to point out is witches have no toes. Ooh. So, we learned a few things about our family here, the main character and his grandmama. His grandmother used to try to search for witches. She tried to search for the Grand High Witch, who is the worst of them all. She is the leader of all of the witches, goes around from country to country and helps them come up with evil plans to get rid of children. They meet once a year in every country. Also, him and his grandmama planned on going to Norway for the summer. Well, his grandmother got sick, and she got better, but not quite well enough for a long trip. So they had to stay in England, and they went to a hotel on the beach called the Hotel Majestic. And our little main character has some new friends, 2 little white mice that his grandmother gave him to have as companions and little pets. Well, last we have left our main character, he was sneaking around the hotel finding a good place to train his mice. And he ended up in the ballroom, where a very large group of ladies came in, and they are a group claiming to be called the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. I have a feeling they're a little more notorious than that. So, let's see exactly what happens in our next chapter of The Witches. Chapter 6. The Meeting. Now that the manager had gone, I was not particularly alarmed. What better than to be imprisoned in a room full of these splendid ladies? If I ever got talking to them, I might even suggest that they come and do a bit of cruelty to children prevention at my school. We could certainly use it there. In they came, talking their heads off. They began milling around and choosing their seats, and there was a whole lot of stuff like, "Come and sit next to me, Milly dear," and "Oh, hello, Beatrice. I haven't seen you since the last meeting. What an adorable dress you have on." I decided to stay where I was and let them get on with their meeting, while I got on with my mouse training. But I watched them for a little while longer through the crack in the screen, waiting for them to settle down. How many were there? I guessed about 200. The back rows filled up first. They all seemed to want to sit as far back from the platform as possible. There was a lady wearing a tiny green hat in the middle of the back row who kept scratching the nape of her neck. She couldn't leave it alone. It fascinated me the way her fingers kept scratching away at the hair on the back of her neck. Had she known somebody was watching her from behind, I'm sure she would have been embarrassed. I wondered if she had dandruff. All of a sudden, I noticed the lady next to her was doing the same thing. And the next one. And the next. The whole lot of them were doing it. They were all scratching away like mad at the hair on the back of their necks. Did they have fleas in their hair? More likely it was nits. A boy at school called Ashton had had nits in his hair last term, and the matron had made him dip his whole head in turpentine. It killed the nits all right, but it nearly killed Ashton as well. Half the skin came away from his scalp. I began to be fascinated by these hair-scratching ladies. It is always funny when you catch someone doing something coarse, and she thinks no one is looking. Nose-picking, for example, or scratching her bottom. Hair-scratching is very nearly as unattractive, especially if it goes on and on. I decided it had to be nits. Then the most astonishing thing happened. I saw one lady pushing her fingers up underneath the hair on her head, and the hair, the entire head of hair, lifted upwards all in one piece, and the hand slid underneath the hair and went on scratching. She was wearing a wig. She was also wearing gloves. I glanced swiftly around at the rest of the now seated audience. Every one of them was wearing gloves. My blood turned to ice. I began to shake all over. I glanced frantically behind me for a back door to escape through. There wasn't one. Should I leap out from behind the screen and make a dash for the double doors? Those double doors were already closed, and I could see a woman standing in front of them. She was bending forward and fixing some sort of metal chain around the two door handles. Keep still, I told myself. No one has seen you yet. There's no reason in the world why they should come and look behind the screen. But one false move, one cough, one sneeze, one nose blow, one little sound of any sort, and it would be just one witch that gets you. It would be 200. At that point, I think I fainted. The whole thing was altogether too much for a small boy to cope with. But I don't believe I was out for much more than a few seconds. And when I came to, I was lying on the carpet and I was still, thank heavens, behind the screen. There was an absolute silence all around me. Rather shakily, I got to my knees and peered again through the crack in the screen. Chapter 7. Frizzled like a fritter. All the women, or rather the witches, were now sitting motionless in their chairs and staring as though hypnotized at somebody who had suddenly appeared on the platform. That somebody was another woman. The first thing I noticed about this woman was her size. She was tiny, probably no more than 4.5 feet tall. She looked quite young, I guess about 25 or 6, and she was very pretty. She had on a rather stylish long black dress that reached right to the ground, and she wore black gloves that came up to her elbows. Unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a hat. She didn't look to me like a witch at all, but she couldn't possibly not be one. Otherwise, what on earth was she doing up on the platform? And why, for heaven's sake, were all the other witches gazing at her with such a mixture of adoration, awe, and fear? Very slowly, the young lady on the platform raised her hands to her face. I saw her gloved fingers unhooking something behind her ears, and then she caught hold of her cheeks and lifted her face clean away. The whole of that pretty face came away in her hands. It was a mask. As she took off the mask, she turned sideways and placed it carefully upon the small table nearby. And when she turned round again and faced us, I nearly screamed out loud. That face of hers was the most frightful and frightening thing I had ever seen. Just looking at it gave me the shakes all over. It was so crumpled and wizened, so shrunken and shriveled, it looked as though it had been pickled with vinegar. It was a fearsome and ghastly sight. There was something terribly wrong with it, something foul and putrid and decayed. It seemed quite literally to be rotting away at the edges, and in the middle of her face, around her mouth and cheeks, I could see the skin was all cankered and worm-eaten, as though maggots were working away in there. There are times when something is so frightful you become mesmerized by it and can't look away. I was like that now. I was transfixed. I was numbed. I was magnetized by the sheer horror of this woman's features. But there was more to it than that. There was a look of serpents in those eyes of hers. Ooh. As they flashed around the audience, I knew immediately, of course, that this was none other than the Grand High Witch herself. I knew also why she had worn a mask. She could never have moved around in public, let alone book in at a hotel with her real face. Everyone who saw her would have run away screaming. "The doors!" the Grand High Witch shouted in a voice that filled the room and bounced around the walls. "Are they chained and bolted?" "The doors are chained and bolted, your grandness," answered a voice in the audience. The brilliant snake eyes that were set so deep in that dreadful, rotting, worm-eaten face glared unblinkingly at the witches who sat facing her. "You may remove your gloves," she shouted. Her voice, I noticed, had that same hard metallic quality as the voice of the witch I had met under the concord tree, only it was far louder and much harsher. It rasped, it grated, it snarled, it scraped, it shrieked, and it growled. Everyone in the room was peeling off their gloves. I was watching the hands of those in the back row. I wanted very much to see what their fingers looked like and whether my grandmother had been right. Ah, yes, I could see several of them now. I could see the brown claws curving over the tips of their fingers. They were about 2 inches long, those claws, and sharp at the ends. "You may remove your shoes," barked the Grand High Witch. I heard a sigh of relief going up from all the witches in the room as they kicked off their narrow, high-heeled shoes, and I got a glimpse under the chairs of several pairs of stocking feet, square and completely toeless. Revolting as they were, as though the toes had been sliced away from the feet with a carving knife. "You may remove your wigs," snarled the Grand High Witch. She had a particular way of speaking. There was some sort of foreign accent there, something harsh and guttural, and she seemed to have trouble pronouncing the letter W. As well as that, she did something funny with the letter R. She would roll it around and around in her mouth like a piece of hot pork crackling before spitting out. "Remove your wigs and get some fresh air into our spotty scalps," she shouted. And another sigh of relief rose up from the audience as all the hands went up to their head and all the wigs, with the hats still on them, were lifted away. There now appeared in front of me a row upon row of bald female heads, a sea of naked scalps, every one of them red and itchy looking from being rubbed by the linings of the wigs. I simply cannot tell you how awful they were. And somehow the whole sight was made more grotesque because underneath those frightfully scabby bald heads, the bodies were dressed in fashionable and rather pretty clothes. It was monstrous. It was unnatural. Oh, heavens, I thought. Oh, help. Oh, Lord, have mercy on me. These foul-bald females are child killers, every one of them. And here I am, imprisoned in the same room, and I can't escape. At that point, a new and doubly horrifying thought struck me. My grandmother had said that with their special nose holes, they could smell out a child in a pitch-black night from right across the other side of the road. Up to now, my grandmother had been right every time. It seemed a certainty, therefore, that one of the witches in the back row was going to sniff me out at any moment, and then yell of "Dog's droppings!" would go up all over the room, and I would be cornered like a rat. I knelt on the carpet behind the screen, hardly daring to breathe. Then suddenly, I remembered another very important thing my grandmother had told me. "The dirtier you are," she had said, "the harder it is for a witch to smell you out." How long had it been since I'd had a bath? Not for ages. I'd had my own room in the hotel, and my grandmother never bothered with silly things like that. Come to think of it, I don't believe I bathed since we arrived. When had I last washed my hands and face? Certainly not this morning. Not yesterday either. I glanced down at my hands. They were covered with smudge and mud, and goodness knows what else besides. So perhaps I had a chance after all. The stinking waves couldn't possibly get out through all that dirt. "Witches of England!" shouted the Grand High Witch. She herself, I noticed, had not taken off either her wig or her gloves or her shoes. "Witches of England!" she yelled. The audience stirred uneasily and sat up straighter in their chairs. "Miserable witches!" she yelled. "Useless, lazy witches! Feeble, fribbling witches! You're a heap of idle, good-for-nothing worms!" A shudder went through the audience. The Grand High Witch was clearly in an ugly mood, and they knew it. I had a feeling that something awful was going to happen soon. "I am having my breakfast this morning," cried the Grand High Witch, "and am looking out of the window at the beach. And what am I seeing? I am asking you, what am I seeing? I am seeing a revolting sight. I am seeing hundreds, I am seeing thousands of rotten, repulsive little children playing on the sand. It is putting me right out of my food. Why have you not gotten rid of them?" she screamed. "Why have you not rubbed them all out, these filthy, smelling children?" With each word she spoke, flecks of pale blue spit shot from her mouth like little bullets. "I am asking you why!" she screamed. Nobody answered her question. "Children smell!" she screamed. "They stink out the world! We do not want these children around here!" The bald heads in the audience all nodded vigorously. "One child a week is no good to me!" the Grand Witch cried out. "Is that the best you can do?" "We will do better," murmured the audience. "We will do so much better." "Better is no good either," shrieked the Grand High Witch. "I demand maximum results. So here are my orders. My orders are that every single child in this country shall be rubbed out, squashed, squirted, spittered, and frittered before I come here again in 1 year time. Do I make myself clear?" A great gasp went up from the audience. I saw the witches all looking at one another with deeply troubled expressions, and I heard one witch at the end of the front row saying aloud, "All of them? We can't possibly wipe out all of them." The Grand High Witch whipped around as though somebody had stuck a skewer in her bottom. "Who said that?" she snapped. "Who dares argue with me? It was you, was it not?" She pointed a gloved finger as sharp as a needle at the witch who had spoken. "I didn't mean it, your grandness," the witch cried out. I didn't mean to argue. I was just talking to myself. You dared argue with me, screamed the Grand High Witch. I was just talking to myself, cried the wretched witch. I swear at your grandness. She began to shake with fear. The Grand High Witch took a quick step forward, and when she spoke again, it was in a voice that made my blood run cold. A stupid witch who answers back must burn until her bones are black, she screamed. No, no, begged the witch in the front row. The Grand High Witch went on. A foolish witch without a brain must sizzle in fiery flame. Save me, cried the wretched witch in the front row. The Grand High Witch took no notice of her. She spoke again. An idiotic witch like you must roast upon the barbecue. Forgive me, oh, your grandness, cried the miserable culprit. I didn't mean it. But the Grand High Witch continued with her terrible recital. A witch who dares to say I'm wrong will not be with us very long. A moment later, a stream of sparks that looked like tiny white-hot metal fillings came shooting out of the Grand High Witch's eyes and flew straight towards the one who had dared to speak. I saw the sparks striking against her and burrowing her, and she screamed a horrible, howling scream, and a puff of smoke rose up around her. A smell of burning meat filled the room. Nobody moved. Like me, they were all watching the smoke, and when it cleared away, the chair was empty. I caught a glimpse of something wispy white, like a cloud fluttering upwards and disappearing out the window. A great sigh rose up from the audience. The Grand High Witch glared around the room. I hope nobody else is going to make me cross today, she remarked. There was a deadly silence. Frizzled like a fritter, the Grand High Witch said. Cooked like a carrot. You will never see her again. Now we can get down to business. Chapter 8. Formula 86, Delayed Action Mouse Maker. Children are revolting, screamed the Grand High Witch. We will wipe them all away. We will scrub them off the face of the earth. We will flush them down the drain. Yes, yes, chanted the audience. Wipe them away, scrub them off the earth, flush them down the drain. Children are foul and filthy, thundered the Grand High Witch. They are, chorused the English witches. They are foul and filthy. Children are dirty and stinky, screamed the Grand High Witch. Dirty and stinky, cried the audience, getting more and more worked up. Children are smelling of dogs' droppings, screeched the Grand High Witch. Pooh, cried the audience. Pooh, pooh, pooh. They are worse than dogs' droppings, screeched the Grand High Witch. Dogs' droppings is smelling like violets and primroses compared with children. Violets and primroses, chanted the audience. They were clapping and cheering almost every word spoken from the platform. The speaker seemed to have them completely under her spell. To talk about children is making me sick, screamed the Grand High Witch. I am feeling sick even thinking about them. Fetch me a basin. The Grand High Witch paused and glared at the mass of eager faces in the audience. They waited, wanting more. So now, barked the Grand High Witch, so now I am having a plan. I'm having a giganticus plan for getting rid of every single child in the whole of England. The witches gasped. They gaped. They turned and gave each other ghoulish grins of excitement. Yes, thundered the Grand High Witch, we shall swish them and swallow them, and we shall make them disappear, every single smelly little brat of England, in one stroke. Whoopee! Cried the witches, clapping their hands. You are brilliant, oh, your grandness! You are fantabulous! Shut up and listen, snapped the Grand High Witch. Listen very carefully, and let us not be having any muck-ups." The audience leaned forward, eager to learn how this magic was going to be performed. "Each and every one of you," thundered the Grand High Witch, "is going to go back to your hometowns immediately and resign from your jobs. Resign! Give notice! Retire!" "We will," they cried. "We will resign from our jobs." "And after you have resigned from your jobs," the Grand High Witch went on, "each and every one of you will be going out, and you will be buying—" She paused. "What will we be buying?" they cried. "Tell us, O brilliant one! What is it shall we be buying?" "Sweet shops!" shouted the Grand High Witch. "Sweet shops!" they cried. "We are going to buy sweet shops! What a frontubulous wheeze! Each of you will be buying for herself a sweet shop. You will be buying the very best and most respectable sweet shops in England." "We will, they answered. Their dreadful voices were like a chorus of dentist drills all grinding away together. "I am wanting no tuppenny happenny crummy little tobacco-smelling sweet shops," shouted the Grand High Witch. "I am wanting you to get only the very best shops, filled up high with piles and piles of luscious sweets and tasty chocks." "The best!" they cried. "We shall buy the best sweet shops in town." "You will be having no trouble in getting what you want," shouted the Grand High Witch, "because you will be offering 4 times as much as shop is worth, and nobody is refusing an offer like that. Money is not a problem to us witches, as you know very well. I have brought with me 6 trunks stuffed full of English banknotes, all new and crisp, and all of them," she added with a fiendish leer, "all of them homemade." The witches in the audience grinned, appreciating this joke. At that point, one foolish witch got so excited at the possibility presented by owning a sweet shop that she leapt to her feet and shouted, "The children will come flocking to my shop, and I will feed them poisoned sweets and poisoned chocks and wipe them out like weasels." The room became suddenly silent. I saw the tiny body of the Grand High Witch stiffen, then go rigid with rage. "Who spoke?" she shrieked. "It was you? You over there?" The culprit sat down fast and covered her face with her clawed hands. "You blithering bumpkin!" screeched the Grand High Witch. "You brainless bog vampire! You are not realizing what you are going round poisoning little children. You will be caught in 5 minutes flat. Never in my life am I hearing such a bush-vloping suggestion coming from a witch." The entire audience cowered and shook. I'm quite sure that they all thought, as I did, that the terrible white-hot sparks were about to come flying again. Curiously enough, they didn't. "Such a tom-fiddling idea is all you can come up with," thundered the Grand High Witch. "Then it is no wonder England is still swarming with rotten little children." There was another silence. The Grand High Witch glared at the witches in the audience. "Do you know," she shouted at them, "that we witches are working only with magic?" "We know, your grandness," they all answered. "Of course we know." The Grand High Witch grated her bony gloved hands against each other and cried out, "So each of you is owning a magnificent sweet shop. The next move is that each of you will be announcing in the window of your shop that a certain day you will be having a great gala opening with free sweets and chocks to every child." "That will bring them in, the greedy little brutes," cried the audience. "They'll be fighting to get through the doors." "Next," continued the Grand High Witch, you will prepare yourselves for this great grand opening by filling every chook and every sweet in your shop with my very latest, the greatest magic formula. It is known as Formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker. Delayed Action Mouse Maker, they all chanted. She's done it again. Her grandness has concocted yet another of her wondrous magic child killers. How do we make it, O brilliant one? Exercise patience, answered the Grand High Witch. First, I am explaining to you how my Formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker is working. Listen carefully. We're listening, cried the audience, who were now jumping up and down in their chairs with excitement. Delayed Action Mouse Maker is a green liquid, explained the Grand High Witch, and one droplet in each chook or sweet will be quite enough. So here is what happens. Child eats chook which has the Delayed Action Mouse Maker liquid. Child goes home feeling fine. Child goes to bed feeling fine. Child wakes up in the morning still okay. Child goes to school feeling fine. Formula, you understand, is delayed action and is not working yet. We understand, oh brainy one, cried the audience. But when does it start working? It is starting to work at exactly 9 o'clock when the child is arriving at school, shouted the Grand High Witch triumphantly. Child is arriving at school. Delayed Action Mouse Maker immediately starts to work. Child starts to shrink. Child is starting to grow fur. Child is starting to grow a tail. All is happening in precisely 26 seconds. After 26 seconds, child is not a child any longer. It is a mouse. A mouse! Cried the witches. What a frumptuous thought! Classrooms will be all surrounded with mice, shouted the Grand High Witch. Chaos and pandemonium will be reigning in every school in England. Teachers will be hopping up and down. Women teachers will be standing on desks and holding their skirts up, yelling, help, help, help! They will, cried the audience. And what, shouted the Grand High Witch, is happening next in every school? Tell us, they cried. Tell us, oh brainy one. The Grand High Witch stretched her stringy neck forward and grinned at the audience, showing 2 rows of pointy teeth, slightly blue. She raised her voice louder than ever and shouted, Mousetraps is coming out! Mousetraps, cried the witches. And cheese, shouted the Grand High Witch. Teachers is all rushing and running around getting mousetraps and baiting them with cheese and putting them down all over the school. Mice is nibbling cheese. Mousetraps is going off all over school. Mousetraps is going snappity-snap. And mouse heads is rolling across the floors like marbles. All over England, in every school in England, noise of snapping mouse traps will be heard. At this point, the disgusting old Grand High Witch began to do a sort of witch's dance up and down the platform, stamping her feet and clapping her hands. The entire audience joined in the clapping and the foot stamping. They were making such a tremendous racket that I thought surely Mr. Stringer would hear and come banging at the door, but he didn't. Then, above all the noise, I heard the voice of the Grand High Witch screaming out some sort of awful, gloating song. Down Come, wee children, do them in, boil their bones and fry their skin, bish them, fish them, bash them, mash them, break them, shake them, slash them, smash them. All the chokes with the magic powder, say eat up, then say it louder, cram them full of sticky eats, then send them home still guzzling sweets. And in the morning little fools go marching off to separate schools. A girl feels sick and goes all pale. She yells, hey look, I've grown a tail. A boy who's standing next to her screams, help, I think I'm growing fur. Another shouts, we look like freaks. There's whiskers growing on our cheeks. A boy whose vase extremely tall cries out, what's wrong? I'm growing small. 4 tiny legs begin to sprout from every roundabout. And all at once, all in a trice, there are no children, only mice. In every school is mice galore, all running round the schoolroom floor. And all the poor, demented teachers is yelling, hey, who are these creatures? They stand upon the desks and shout, get out, you filthy mice, get out. Will someone fetch the mouth traps, please? And don't forget to bring the cheese. Now mouse traps come and every trap goes snippity snap and snappity snap. The mouse traps have wonderful spring. The springs go crack and snap and ping. Is lovely noise, whereas to hear is music to a witch's ear. Dead mice is every place around, piled 2 feet deep upon the ground, with teachers searching left and right, but not a single child in sight. The teachers cry, what's going on? And where have all the children gone? It's 9:30 and is a rule, they're never late as this for school. Poor teachers don't know what to do. Some sit and read, and just a few amuse themselves throughout the day by sweeping all the mice away. And all us witches shout, hooray! All right, that was quite a bit of the story. Let's discuss some things that happened. First, in the meeting, why were all those women scratching their heads? And they all had gloves on. What did our main character finally figure out? They're all witches. Nah. He thought they were all there for a group that was supposed to be about the prevention of cruelty to children. Turns out that's all they're there for. Whew. So why did the witches end up locking the doors? Well, once we found out they're witches, they wanted to be themselves, didn't they? So, the Grand High Witch herself was there, and she told them to remove their gloves. And our main character saw the terrifying claws of the witches. Then to remove their shoes. There it is. Remove their shoes because their toeless feet are crammed in there. Then finally, remove your wigs. So they locked the doors so that no one would come in and see them. What was different about the Grand High Witch versus all these other witches? You remember? Well, at first our main character thought that she was the prettiest of them all. She was wearing a very elegant dress. She had gorgeous gloves on. Her face was pretty. But then, what did she do? She took... So there's her pretty. Then, she took her mask off. And she was the most terrifying of them all. I'm going to show you this for a second. Whew. Scary. what happened when a witch questioned the Grand High Witch's plan of destroying all the children in England? Well, she said a spell and literally kind of blew up the witch. Whew. She went poof in a cloud of smoke. Not good. Scary. Now, we're on to Chapter 8. Formula 86, Delayed Action Mouse Maker. What does the Grand High Witch tell all of the witches to go home and do? So she asked them to do two things, right? First, to go quit all their jobs, because the witches have tried to blend in with everybody, so they just have regular jobs, doing regular things. Well, they're supposed to quit all of their jobs and do what? Buy a sweet shop. So, back when this book came out, there were lots of candy shops all over the place. Lots of kids always went to them all the time. They used any money they had. So, what does the Grand High Witch want the witches to do with their sweet shops? It's not poison the kids. It's use this brilliant plan of the Grand High Witch. She is going to have them all have a big grand opening, right? And then they're going to put this new formula into every candy. And it turns all of the children into mice. Oi. But it doesn't do it right away, right? So it'll be hard to trace it back to that candy if anyone figures out that this is magic. So it waits, and after the next day, right when they all go to school, they turn into mice. Oi, this is not good. Do you think that this plan that the Grand High Witch has will work for taking out all of the children? I'm sure it would take out a lot of them, because that's what a lot of the kids then did. They got sweets and things. Maybe not every single one of them, but a lot of them. Whew. That would be very bad. Well, I guess we'll have to see if our poor main character survives hanging out in the middle of this scary witches meeting and maybe doesn't get turned into a mouse. I don't know. We'll see what happens next in our next chapter book read along of Witches. Bye.